X, a novel by Tim Waggoner, based on the motion picture written and directed by Ty West. 1. Thursday, July 31st, 1979, southeast Texas. Shortly after dawn, Sheriff Dentler drove along a dirt road, his cruiser kicking up a trail of dust in its wake. He hadn't turned on the sirens, and he wasn't driving particularly fast. A couple of his boys were already on the scene, and from what they'd reported, this was a bad one. "It's a bloodbath, Sheriff, like something straight out of hell." He was in no hurry to reach the shit show that awaited him. The farmhouse looked like 100 others in the area. 2 stories, paint mostly gone, wood weathered and gray. But there was a barn just beyond it, and down the hill, a bunkhouse, both structures in no better condition than the house. The grass on the property hadn't been cut in months, and there were no signs of animals or crops. If this had ever been a working farm, those days were long past. A pair of cruisers was parked near the house, lights still flashing, even though nobody else was around for miles. Nobody's alive anyway. Dentler parked a dozen yards from the house and cut the engine. He sat for a moment, took a deep breath, released it slowly, then opened the door and stepped out into the morning air. He was greeted by the nerve-jangling rise and fall of cicada song. It was an especially bad year for the insects, and the trees surrounding the property were thick with the damn things. The sun had only just risen, and while the temperature was bearable at the moment, Dentler knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Another hour, maybe 2, and it would be hot enough to fry a goddamn cicada omelet on the hood of his cruiser. If the situation was as bad as the responding officers had described, they were going to be around for a while, a long while. He wasn't looking forward to spending the day enveloped in the rancid miasma of rotting human flesh and coagulated blood. It took forever to wash that stink off of your skin, and as for the clothes, you might as well just burn them to ash and be done with them. Dentler was a black man in his 50s, dressed in a sheriff's department uniform. Long-sleeve shirt, tie, slacks, boots, gold badge over his left breast, gun holstered at his side, sunglasses on his face, cowboy hat on his head. A former Texas Ranger, he carried himself with easy confidence, his movements slow and deliberate. He learned long ago not to rush through a crime scene, to keep his eyes and ears open, mind sharp and alert. Go too fast and you miss things. Sometimes the smallest detail, a few stray hairs, a half-smudged fingerprint, a faint heel print in the soft ground, could make all the difference when it came to solving a case. Motion near the farmhouse caught his eye, and he saw one of his men, Wilkins, standing on the right side of the porch. Wilkins didn't call out or raise a hand in greeting. Dentler assumed he had stopped outside for some fresh air to keep from throwing up. Idiot probably had a full breakfast this morning. Dentler ate as light as he could while working. You never knew what kind of mess you might step in on this job. Speaking of which, between Dentler and the house was a body, covered in a blood-soaked sheet. The sheriff regarded it for a moment. Hell of a lot of blood, and there was more on the grass around it. Whoever was under the tarp hadn't died easy. Flies buzzed over the heap, their drone a soft counterpoint to the song their larger cousins sang in the trees. Dentler removed a folded handkerchief from his shirt pocket, held it over his mouth and nose, knelt, and took a look. Jesus fucking Christ. He lowered the tarp and started towards the house, stepping carefully through the crime scene. Blood-smeared flagstones led to the porch, and he briefly examined them as he walked past. Did this blood belong to the same person who lay underneath that tarp? Had they been dragged out of the house by someone? Or did this blood belong to someone else? No way to tell just by looking. That was the thing about blood. It all looked the same when spilled. The wooden steps that led to the porch were also smeared with blood, but Dentler found a clear path up. On the right side of the front door was an old milk can. And farther right was a wicker table with 2 wooden fold-in chairs. To the left of the door was a love seat that had seen far better days. And past that was a small collection of junk. A rusted barbecue, wooden crates filled with empty bottles, stacks of newspapers tied with twine. A hatchet was embedded in one of the planks near the door, blood on its handle. More blood stretched across the porch from the door to the steps in a streak nearly 2 feet wide. None of the blood he'd seen so far was fully dry yet. This butchery couldn't have taken place more than a few hours ago. The screen door was closed, but the screen itself was torn open. From the inside, it looked like. Dentler didn't want to touch the door handle, not even with his handkerchief. If there were any useful prints there, he wanted to preserve them. So he pushed aside the broken screen and stepped inside. He smelled old wood, dust, mildew, combined with the stink of piss and shit. Dead bodies tended to expel waste as their muscles relaxed, which always seemed to Dentler a final, unnecessary indignity, as if dying itself wasn't bad enough. There were 2 more bodies just beyond the door. One propped against the wall, the other on the floor, both covered with blankets. No flies yet, but they would arrive soon. The body against the wall was larger than the one on the floor, and Dentler guessed he was looking at a male and a female, or maybe an adult and a child. It was dim inside, no lights, and a man's voice droned from a television in a room to the left. Dentler stepped through the open doorway and saw a small black and white TV resting atop a wooden stand. On the screen, a preacher near a lectern, microphone in hand, was addressing a rapt congregation.
In dark times such as these, we must all remember to look to the Lord for guidance. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. I regret to say I know the powers of Satan firsthand. Our very own daughter was taken by perverts and swindlers and let fall into a world of sin.
Dentler glanced around the room. Old furniture, shelves cluttered with knickknacks, walls covered with framed black and white photos. Dust clung to everything, and there was a different smell in here. A sour fustiness that he associated with old people. He heard floorboards creak and turned to see an officer step into the doorway. It was Mitchell, the first of his men to arrive on the scene. He was older than Wilkins by almost 2 decades and had worked for the department nearly as long. It took a lot to rattle him, but he sure as hell looked rattled now. Jaw slack, eyes wide, a hollowness in his voice. "Sheriff, you really ought to come take a look at this," he said. Dentler nodded and allowed Mitchell to lead him out of the room. They turned left and down the hall and headed toward the kitchen. The counters were grimy, the sink filled with grease-slicked dishes. Dentler wouldn't have been surprised to see a rat or 2 scuttling about. Normally, he tried not to judge people by how tidy they kept their homes, but this place was more than just messy. There was a wrongness here, a sickness, as if the house itself were diseased. Mitchell led him to a cellar door, opened it, and stepped inside. Dentler followed. The top of the stairs was lit by an uncovered bulb, but the steps below were cloaked in deep shadow. Mitchell removed the flashlight from his belt, turned it on, and shone the light ahead. They descended, boots thumping on the wooden steps. No handrail, Dentler thought. Easy to lose your balance, tumble down, break your neck at the bottom. His wife often teased him about the morbid turns his imagination took, but all he ever did was nod and keep his mouth shut. The air grew cooler as they descended. It smelled like damp leather and decayed flowers. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, Dentler saw the basement was lit by a second uncovered bulb, its feeble light doing little to keep the surrounding shadows at bay. Mitchell raised his flashlight and directed the beam at the wall ahead of them. At first, Dentler didn't understand what he was seeing, but then it hit him. His eyes widened, and he took in a quick, gasping breath. My God,